This is great. I'm really, really pleased that we're actually finally back in the room together. We've got the gang back again. So great to see old faces, lots of new faces. And welcome to all those people online as well. So what I normally do is obviously give a roundup of what's been sort of going on, but I think there's far too much that's been going on over the last 3 years now. So yeah, it was in this room we last met, I think it was, someone might correct me, but 27th of April 2019. So it's been far, far too long, as you all know. And a lot's happened in the interim, and we'll touch on just some of those, but we've got a great lineup of speakers today who will touch on a lot of the science research that's going on, a lot of personal perspectives, and a lot of the clinical developments that are going on in this field as well. And obviously we've got the workshops later on where we can actually get into the weeds and have one-to-one discussions over coffee, as we always do. So really great to see everyone. So let's turn to the thing that's really kept us away, and that was coronavirus. I mean, COVID-19, who knew? We'd never heard of the name COVID before, and now it's all on our tongues, right? And it's been a hell of a ride. We've all locked down. For me, I've lost a whole year. I mean, it's just, where did that year go? But I'll tell you about some of the things we've been doing during the subsequent time. But I think that both the society, BBS UK, really did step up to the mark during that period, because we were able to instantly go online and share with the community a whole host of webinars. And those webinars were really, many of you will have joined those, and it was really to try to make some sense of the confusion that was around coronavirus at the time. We just didn't know what the government didn't, quite clearly. No government knew what to do. So 1 minute we're in lockdown, next minute, some people have to shield, other people can go out shopping, others can't. And, we just hadn't got a clue. So in the webinars, at least we tried to relay what we understood about the information that was coming out of the governments. Sadly, Public Health England wasn't really any better and didn't really help us in terms of guidance. So we sort of had to try to make it up as we go along with the best guidance in mind. But I think we came through that. As far as the clinics were concerned, we had to go online as well. So terrible time for all of us, but I think we've come through it, and I hope that we never have to have another lockdown. Just incidentally, just as a sort of straw poll, put your hand up if you actually had COVID. Oh my word. It's like 95%. 95% of you. Okay, so, it's like a cold now, really, I guess we could say. But obviously, if you're vulnerable, that's something you have to be incredibly careful of. But, I think it's something that we really need to be mindful of. But in retrospect, we can always say, did we overreact? We just don't know. At the time, we had nothing else we could do. But I think now we're suffering as a consequence of it, and will do over the next few months or next few years. Anyway, I'm going to move on now to talk about, give the update on our clinical service in the UK for BBS, for Bardet-Biedl syndrome. We're in our 11th year now of this service that's been commissioned by the National Health Service, and most of you in this room come to one of those clinics, and some of you who are new to BBS or have new diagnoses will be joining us at one of these clinics. And just very briefly, just to say, look, we have 4 clinics, 2 children's clinics, one in Birmingham, one in London, and then an adult clinic, again, one in Birmingham and one in London. So we essentially have provided a system, a clinic that really takes care of patients throughout their life. And this was something that was really dear to me when we first started this back in 2010, because patients, or children, when they get to the age of 17 or 18, who have a rare disease are usually lost to follow-up. So we're in a really blessed position, should I say, that we can run these clinics. Now, the other thing about this clinic system is it's actually held up as a major model, and that's because of BBS UK. And BBS UK has, I've said this year in and year out, are absolutely integral to the way in which we run the clinics. They're there to do all of the things that we as clinicians cannot do or do not know how to do. And so holistically, we think for a lot of people and the feedback that we've had that it's an absolutely fantastic experience, but also is a valuable service for all of you. And we don't sit there quietly. We actually utilize, as I'll show you in just a moment, a lot of the information that you're giving us, because we constantly want to move forward and improve services, improve research, improve potential therapies, those kind of things. So thank you to the BBS UK team, the clinical team, led by Tonya. We've got a couple of new members, Laura and Shirin, and Angela and Amy, who are the stalwarts of the clinic. So thank you so much. Big round of applause for them. So one thing that is not abating at all is the number of new referrals we're getting. It's crazy. So last year we had, between 2021 and 2022, we have 42 new referrals, 25 of whom were children. So, where are all you guys? Where have you been hiding? Because this is actually 100% increase on what we predicted back in 2010 when we went to the NHS to ask them to commission the service. They said, well, how many, they need to be able to project. Anyway, the long and short of it is that our budget hasn't increased at all. So we're having to, constantly think of new ways of accommodating new referrals as they come in. But it also tells us something, and I'll show you a slide in a moment, of just how prevalent BBS probably is, that it's much more common than we think. And I don't know whether Tim and Francis would agree on that in your respective countries, that we're just touching the tip of the iceberg. Okay, we were in a fortunate position during COVID, during the lockdowns, because we had got a little bit of extra funding prior to, I think it was about 2018-19, to begin telemedicine clinics. And that's because of the pressure on the service. So we didn't want to miss out on seeing and reviewing folks. So we took a lot of this online. And of course, then we were able to take this online as soon as the lockdowns came. And I'm not saying it ran perfectly, and I'm not saying it's a replacement, because you can never replace a face-to-face clinic, but it works extremely well. And in actual fact, during the lockdowns, we were able to really just make sure that the people who are in the greatest need of having medical intervention, we could actually identify those individuals and bring them up to clinic. It was very difficult, obviously, in clinics, but bring them up to have ultrasound scans, eye tests, whatever it might be, blood tests. So that was fantastic. And again, thanks to the nursing team and Kath in particular, who helped facilitate all of those testing in hard times. So we gather a lot of data from these clinics. We have around, I think it's 27 I last looked at, different ethnic groups that come to these clinics. So it really, really is diverse. And it also says, that this really does touch every ethnic group on the planet. We can also see the age ranges of those who are coming to the clinics. Our youngest patients are around 6 months of age, and our oldest ones are in their early 70s. In fact, just these last few weeks in clinic in London, we saw 2 babies who were actually identified before they were born with BBS. And 20 years ago, that would just be a pipe dream. So something's getting out there as far as raising awareness is concerned, but there's a lot more yet to do. And again, as I said, I'm showing you a map here for those who can't see the screen of basically the world, and virtually every population that we know of where someone has published the data, there are patients with BBS. So it is really a worldwide, global problem, and something that we're really, again, blessed to be able to help try to raise that awareness. So some of the other information that we gather as well has been really, really important, which you may not appreciate, is around the natural history of BBS. So as I say, a lot of us in this room have been working on BBS for many, many years. And one of the missing items was the fact that we didn't really know what the disease looked like literally from birth, into adulthood. And so by collecting this information, we now know what percentage of people are born with extra fingers and extra toes, what percentage have visual impairment, and what is the average age of onset. What's the magnitude of the weight gain issues. All of these kind of things have really come to us from the clinic and actually from the registry as well. And Elizabeth Forsyth will be talking a little bit later about digging into the registry and what we can learn from that registry as well. But that reminds me also to congratulate Elizabeth on being appointed a consultant. So she's going to come back to the service, and so all of you will have the good fortune or misfortune of seeing her once again in your clinic, both the children's clinic and the adult clinic in London anyway. And this also comes on to some work that we've been doing for many, many years, and you'll know that part of the service is to do the genetic testing of everybody who comes. And, again, Beth Hoskins led the way in terms of designing the testing program for the UK. It's changed somewhat during the last couple of years, so it doesn't affect you. You still get the test, but it just gives us a challenge in terms of trying to collate the data, because it's no longer tested in one centre where Beth works at Great Ormond Street Hospital, but it's now spread across the country. So we're going to have a bit of a challenge keeping up with the numbers. But nonetheless, it's really, really important to understand what the breakdown of the genetics looks like. And many of you have heard this over the years I've talked about. But just simply to say, look, as in many parts of the world, the most prevalent, the most commonly faulty gene that we see amongst the 22 or so BBS genes is BBS1, followed by BBS10. And then the rest of them, we know exactly who has which mutation. Why do we want to know that? Well, that can help us with a lot of not only applying better clinical care for you guys as well, but also thinking about the best therapies as well. And so this is work that Elizabeth did some years ago, where she broke down all of the genetic testing by genes, by individuals, and worked out what does that landscape look like. And this has really helped us to think about what are the potential treatments or therapies going forward. Because I've stood up here for many, many years, and we've talked about BBS, but there hasn't actually been any opportunity for therapy. Now, part of that work that Elizabeth did, and we published this many years ago now, was to think about which patients, based on the genotypes, could benefit from some of the new revolutionary therapies that are starting to emerge at the moment. None of them are actually in the clinic yet. There is one actually that many of you have been involved with, this setmelanotide study for weight gain, and that's fantastic, absolutely fantastic, and that's been leading the way. But in terms of genetic therapies, there are none yet out there. But there are a whole bunch of different types of genetic therapy. long names like antisense oligonucleotide therapies. You don't need to know what that's about. Read-through therapies and gene therapy as well. And what we've indicated is that it's very likely that a lot of patients could benefit from gene therapies. There are a lot of politics around that as well, but we won't get into, we can discuss later on. But this has been a fundamental study in understanding what we can possibly do. So I did discuss when we went online last year, but not all of you will have been there, about what we've been doing during COVID, Victor Hernandez and myself. And so during lockdown, when a lot of people were trying to find their feet, we actually already had our path sorted out. And that was to start a new company, which was a spin-out company from UCL to develop a gene therapy for Bardet-Biedl syndrome. And it's we're based at the Royal Veterinary College in London, just near King's Cross Station. These are a couple of our colleagues, a couple of horses that sit in the Royal Veterinary College. There's lots of other animals there because don't forget, it's actually the #1 veterinary college in the world, so they obviously train all the new vets there as well. And we established and worked hard to create the company with Victor. So we had a number of, in the early stages, we've been working on gene therapy for coming up to 10 years now, beginning in the university. So in our lab in the university at UCL, we started the gene therapy program way back. And it was the insights from that early work that enabled us to think about even taking this therapy to clinic. We had to do this through a number of grants along the way, but also we made a decision, and I won't talk about those now, we can discuss it offline if you want to, but we made a decision that the best way to do this was to form a small startup company with investment from investors, from what are called venture capitalists. And that was because the order of magnitude of funding is so much higher. We're talking about tens of millions. So normally when we get a grant, it'll be for a few £100,000. But in order to take any therapy whatsoever, a new drug or what have you, to the market, it costs millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions for some of these, your next blood pressure tablet, for example. That will cost probably in the order of $1 billion. And will take something like 13 years. So very, very briefly, gene therapy, what is it? It's a way of correcting the deficiencies that any of you who have BBS will have in each of the cells in your body, okay? A lot of people think it's about replacing genes. It's not. We're not replacing genes. We're adding to the genes that are not working very well in that cell, but we're adding a working copy. So genes essentially make proteins. So you're making a good protein copy within those cells that matter. So it's quite an old technology, but it's taken a long time to really gain a lot of traction and to actually get out there. I mean, there are something like 700 clinical trials going on at the moment for various other gene therapies out there. So it's a technology that's here to stay, but it's not been without its problems. So the first approved gene therapy actually was in 1990, and it was for a condition called SCID, which is immunodeficiency, and Ashanti De Silva was the first patient to receive this gene therapy for this immune deficiency. And I'm showing you an image here of her venturing outside the bubble in which she had to live, always, because she could not be exposed, she couldn't touch her parents, she could not be exposed to the environment because the risks were too high of infection. And she's venturing outside in essentially a spacesuit here. So she was the first person to successfully be treated with a gene therapy, and this is her recently, as an adult, she's completely cured, okay? So it has potential in some instances to cure, but certainly to alleviate a lot of problems. But it's a complicated pathway. It consists of many steps: a discovery step, a preclinical step, a clinical step, and then a commercial step. And the diagram I'm showing you here shows those equal parts, but in actual fact, in terms of timelines, we first found the first gene for BBS back in 2000. So really that discovery phase started back then. And it's taken really until just the last couple of years to be able to get to a point where we can even think about therapies. So that discovery piece is extremely long. And that always happens in universities. And there's lots of researchers here today to share some of that work. And then you have to get to a point where you need to be able to show that the therapy you're developing is safe. And not only safe, it then has to pass all of the approvals from the regulators. You've heard of FDA. In the UK, we have the MHRA. In Europe, we have the EMA, the European Medicines Agency. They run a very tight ship, and you have very high standards around safety, quite rightly. Okay? And then at that point, once you get the first approval, you can go into start your clinical trials. And much as some of you have been involved with or thinking about joining things like the setmelanotide study, that's gone through all of those phases in order to get to that point. And then only when you've done several years of showing that it works and it's safe, then you can think about commercializing it in actually getting out there and giving that therapy to the world. So that's the approach that we've been taking. So specifically, what is the approach that we have been taking? So we have been using a virus called an AAV to carry the gene into the cells. Now, COVID has done one thing. And put your hand up if you had the AstraZeneca vaccine. So, okay, yes, a majority of people here. Now, that was a gene therapy. You've all had a gene therapy. They put the DNA for the spike protein of the COVID-19 inside this inert virus, this virus that doesn't actually harm us, but it takes it into the cells. And so we're doing the same thing. We're using a specific type of AAV which can target the eye in this particular instance, because they have different ones. And, so really what is the evidence that the gene therapy that we've been developing actually works? And so Victor's team have been showing that if you give gene therapy to a mouse that has BBS, so we have several mice that have BBS, and they behave in a pretty similar way, very rowdy, very noisy, and they essentially, exactly. So, and they essentially, if we treat when they're babies one eye, but don't treat the other eye, then you have what's called an internal control. And what we were able to show, and Victor's team has shown irrefutably, is that we can preserve and prevent vision loss in that treated eye for most of the lifetime of that mouse. And whereas the other eye deteriorates as we would expect. So that's pretty good evidence, but there's a big jump to move into man, obviously, and that's our mission at the moment. And, everything's been going extremely well over the last couple of years. And then, of course, we've been hit by the stock market crash. And this is one of the big problems of, the way in which we are funded. And, I have to be, frank with you that we've had to pause the program. But I am absolutely delighted to be able to share with you that we feel confident that we now have new investors lined up so that we can pick this program up again. But it probably has delayed us by about a year or so. So rather than treating the first patient in the early part of next year, as we had originally hoped to do, I think we're probably looking somewhere toward 2024 now. So that'll be the first gene therapy for BBS1. Okay, there's a lot we have to hope for, but unfortunately it's the way of the world. And funding has always been difficult for those of you who come to this clinic. But I just wanted to be transparent and let you all know where we are. Okay, in the last couple of minutes, research, I'm not going to go into much detail here at all, but simply to say that it continues unabated. So I'm showing a graph here from 1946 of all the publications specifically around Bardet-Biedl syndrome. There are 1,428 listed out there, and in the last 2 years we've seen the most prolific time, despite COVID. 2021, there are 128 publications specifically around BBS. Okay, most of this has been a flat line until about 20 years ago. So 20 years ago, what happened? Well, we found the first gene, and we also worked out what it did, all the cilia business that you're going to hear about shortly. And it has escalated since then, and it doesn't look like it's going to change at all. So that's really great news. And there's lots of publications out there. I'm not singling any particular out. There's one publication, for example, where a lot of you contributed to the 100,000 Genomes Project as well. So that's also been published. So I'm just coming to the last slide now. I just want to thank you all for listening. I just hope, I'm showing a picture of myself here with a mask on. I hope this is the last time you ever see me with a mask. This is great. I'm really, really pleased that we're actually finally back in the room together.